What drives someone to keep a secret so deadly it tears apart the people they love? Today we uncover a story that will leave you questioning the bonds of family and trust. In the quiet suburbs of New York, Barbara Kendhammer seemed to lead a typical life as a devoted wife and stepmother. But one fateful evening, Barbara vanished without a trace. Her disappearance unraveled a web of lies involving her husband Thomas and her stepson Daniel. What started as a missing persons case soon turned into an investigation filled with betrayal, conflicting accounts, and a truth too horrifying to imagine. Our story begins in the quiet streets of Elmwood, a suburb on the outskirts of Syracuse, New York. Elmwood is the kind of place where neighbors greet each other over white picket fences and families gather for backyard barbecues. It's peaceful, it's predictable, and it was the perfect place for the Kendhammer family. Or so it seemed. Barbara Kendhammer lived in a modest, well-kept home on Maplewood Drive, a neighborhood where everyone knew everyone. The house had a small front yard adorned with blooming azaleas in the spring and a porch swing that creaked with the rhythm of the wind. To outsiders, the Kendhammers appeared like any other family in Elmwood, blending seamlessly into the fabric of suburban life. But behind those closed doors, a storm was brewing. Barbara was 42 years old when she disappeared. Friends described her as warm and kind, the type of person who never hesitated to help others. She worked part-time as a teacher's aide at the local elementary school, where she was adored by students and staff alike. Barbara had a passion for gardening and often spent her weekends tending to the roses in her backyard. Her friends knew her as a strong-willed woman, but she had her struggles. Barbara's marriage to Thomas Kendhammer had spanned 15 years. Thomas was a construction foreman, known for his meticulous work ethic, but also for his temper. Together, they had no biological children, but Barbara became a stepmother to Daniel, Thomas's son from a previous relationship. Despite her efforts to build a bond with Daniel, the relationship was never easy. Barbara often confided in her close friends about the challenges of being a stepmother, admitting that she sometimes felt like an outsider in her own home. Barbara's social circle was small but supportive. She was active in her church community and often volunteered for local events. Her life seemed full, but those who knew her well sensed an underlying tension, something unspoken that she carried with her. To understand the events leading to Barbara's disappearance, we must examine the dynamics within the Kendhammer household. Thomas was described as a man of few words, reserved but authoritative. While he was respected in his professional life, his personal relationships told a different story. Daniel, Barbara's 21-year-old stepson, lived in the basement apartment of their home. He worked odd jobs and had a reputation for being reclusive. Neighbors rarely saw him, and when they did, he seemed distant and withdrawn. Over time, rumors began to circulate about the tension between Daniel and Barbara. Some said Daniel resented Barbara for stepping into his mother's role, while others speculated that there was a deeper strain between them. Friends of Barbara noted that her interactions with Thomas had become increasingly strained in the months before her disappearance. There were whispers of arguments overheard late at night and concerns she had shared about feeling isolated. Barbara's best friend recalled one conversation in which she said, "Sometimes it feels like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home." On the surface, the Kendhammer family appeared ordinary, but beneath that surface lay cracks that were growing deeper with each passing day. What was causing the rift? And how would it all lead to Barbara's mysterious disappearance? The answers would soon shock everyone. It was a cold Friday evening in late November. Barbara Kendhammer had spent her day at the elementary school, helping children prepare for the upcoming holiday pageant. At around 5 p.m., she left work and called her best friend Sarah to confirm their plans for a Saturday lunch. Sarah later recalled that Barbara sounded upbeat, though a bit rushed. By 6:30 p.m., Barbara was seen by a neighbor while tending to her rose garden. This would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive. By 8 p.m., Barbara's phone went silent. Calls and messages from friends went unanswered, an unusual behavior for someone known to always keep in touch. At 10:15 p.m., Thomas Kendhammer dialed 911, reporting his wife missing. He claimed she had gone out for a walk around 8:30 p.m. and hadn't returned. His voice, as recorded on the call, was frantic but controlled. Police officers arrived at the Kendhammer residence shortly before 11 p.m., greeted by a visibly distraught Thomas and a silent Daniel. Inside the house, officers noticed Barbara's purse and keys sitting on the kitchen counter. Her coat, the one she always wore during her evening walks, was hanging by the door. Strangely, her cell phone was missing. Thomas explained that Barbara sometimes walked with her phone to listen to music, but this raised a question: why would she leave her coat behind on such a chilly evening? Police launched a search immediately, canvassing the neighborhood and nearby wooded areas. Dogs were brought in to track Barbara's scent, which led them to the edge of a park trail before abruptly stopping. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. As investigators delved deeper into the timeline, they began to notice inconsistencies in Thomas's account. He told officers that he had been watching television in the living room from 8 p.m. until the time he called 911. However, when police checked the home's surveillance system, they discovered that the living room camera had been turned off between 7:45 and 10 p.m. When questioned about this, Thomas claimed it was a technical glitch. Daniel's behavior also raised red flags. The stepson, usually reclusive, seemed unusually nervous when officers spoke to him. He told investigators that he had been in his basement apartment the entire evening, playing video games. Yet when detectives reviewed his phone records, they found a series of unanswered calls from Barbara starting at 8:15 p.m. Why hadn't Daniel mentioned these calls? And why hadn't he answered them? The search of the Kendammer home revealed more troubling details. Investigators found a fresh stain on the carpet in the hallway leading to the master bedroom. Thomas claimed it was spilled wine, but tests later confirmed it to be blood, Barbara's blood. Neighbors also reported hearing raised voices coming from the house earlier that evening. One neighbor, who wished to remain anonymous, stated, "It sounded like an argument. I heard Barbara shouting something about being lied to, and then there was a loud thud." Despite these suspicious details, both Thomas and Daniel insisted they had no knowledge of what had happened to Barbara. Their alibis were shaky at best, but without a body or more concrete evidence, the case remained frustratingly open-ended. As news of Barbara's disappearance spread, the Elmwood community was thrown into a state of shock and fear. Candlelight vigils were held, and posters with Barbara's smiling face were plastered across town. Friends and neighbors shared their memories of her, painting a picture of a woman loved by all who knew her. But behind the scenes, whispers of suspicion began to circulate. Many in the community couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas and Daniel knew more than they were letting on. One neighbor remarked, "Thomas didn't act like a man whose wife was missing. He seemed distant, almost cold." Despite the mounting pressure, Thomas continued to maintain his innocence, often appearing in front of news cameras to plead for Barbara's safe return. His performances, however, were met with skepticism. To some, his tears seemed genuine. To others, they felt rehearsed. As the hours turned into days, the search for Barbara Kendammer intensified. By the following morning, Thomas Kendammer stood before the press, flanked by law enforcement and visibly shaken. With tears streaming down his face, he pleaded, "If anyone has seen my wife or knows anything about where she might be, please help us. Barbara, if you're out there, please come home." The heartfelt appeal struck a chord, and the Elmwood community mobilized in droves. Volunteers gathered at the local church, organizing search parties to scour the woods, parks, and nearby highways. Flyers bearing Barbara's smiling face and the caption, "Missing," were distributed across the town. The mayor himself announced a $10,000 reward for any information leading to her safe return. For days, the townspeople searched tirelessly. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging combed the forests, while divers explored the nearby river. Despite these efforts, no sign of Barbara emerged. Each passing day deepened the community's sense of dread, but it also raised unsettling questions. Why hadn't Thomas joined the search teams? And why did his public appeals feel rehearsed to some who knew him well? 2 weeks into the investigation, police made a discovery that shifted the case's trajectory. Detectives analyzing Barbara's phone records found a string of text messages sent the evening she disappeared. These messages, exchanged with a contact saved as T, painted a troubling picture. In one message, Barbara wrote, "I can't keep living like this. We need to talk tonight." The tone was urgent, almost desperate. When confronted, Thomas admitted he was T, but claimed the conversation was about routine marital issues. Investigators weren't convinced. The texts hinted at something far deeper, perhaps a confrontation about secrets Barbara had uncovered. Simultaneously, a neighbor's security camera footage emerged as another key piece of evidence. The footage, recorded at 9:15 p.m. on the night Barbara disappeared, captured what appeared to be Thomas's truck driving away from the house. Thomas had told police he hadn't left the property that evening, raising suspicions about his honesty. A forensic examination of the truck uncovered small traces of blood on the passenger seatbelt. DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged to Barbara. Thomas explained it away, claiming it was from a minor cut Barbara had sustained earlier in the week. Yet this explanation did little to quell investigators' doubts. From the outset, detectives had viewed Thomas as their primary suspect. His inconsistencies, combined with the blood evidence, pointed toward his potential involvement. But as they dug deeper, another figure emerged in their crosshairs: Daniel, Barbara's stepson. Neighbors described Daniel as quiet and withdrawn, a young man who rarely interacted with others. However, interviews with Barbara's friends painted a different picture. They revealed a tense relationship between Barbara and Daniel, marked by frequent arguments about his behavior and lack of ambition. One friend recounted a conversation where Barbara had confided, "Daniel's anger is unpredictable. I don't know what to do anymore." Police also discovered that Daniel had recently withdrawn large sums of money from his bank account, raising questions about his motives. When questioned, he claimed it was for tuition payments, but investigators couldn't verify this with any records from local colleges. Further analysis of Daniel's phone revealed an alarming exchange. On the night Barbara vanished, he had texted a friend saying, "It's finally happening. Keep quiet." When pressed, Daniel said the text referred to a planned move to another city, but detectives weren't buying it. These revelations led law enforcement to broaden their investigation. Both Thomas and Daniel were now under intense scrutiny, each with their own set of potential motives. Was this a case of a family torn apart by greed, jealousy, or something more sinister? As the search for Barbara continued, the investigation was about to take another shocking turn. As investigators turned their focus to Thomas Kendhammer and his stepson Daniel, each man emerged as a figure cloaked in suspicion. Let's start with Thomas, the grieving husband. From the outside, he seemed like a man desperate to find his wife, but his behavior under scrutiny painted a different picture. Thomas had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Barbara. While he claimed it was a mutual decision for their financial security, detectives wondered if this policy was part of a more sinister plan. Adding to their doubts were several eyewitness accounts that contradicted Thomas's alibi. A neighbor recalled seeing him hurriedly cleaning his truck late at night, just days after Barbara vanished, a detail Thomas failed to mention during questioning. Then there was Daniel, Barbara's 22-year-old stepson, who had been living in the family home for the past 3 years. By all accounts, Daniel and Barbara had a strained relationship. Friends and colleagues of Barbara told police she often described Daniel as troubled and difficult to reach. Investigators learned that Barbara had recently confronted Daniel about his growing debts, which included a gambling problem that she suspected but couldn't prove. As the investigation deepened, police discovered a chilling detail. Daniel had a history of violent outbursts. A former girlfriend came forward, recounting an incident where Daniel had thrown a chair during an argument, narrowly missing her. Could his temper have escalated in a confrontation with Barbara that night? To complicate matters further, forensic analysis of the Kendhammer home uncovered DNA traces belonging to Barbara in Daniel's bedroom. Daniel claimed it was from a time Barbara had helped him clean up after an accidental injury, but detectives weren't convinced. The discovery shifted the spotlight sharply onto him. Was this the proof they needed, or another thread in an increasingly tangled web? Just as the case seemed to reach a stalemate, a bombshell revelation turned everything upside down. Investigators uncovered a series of emails between Thomas and an unknown woman. The emails, sent over a 6-month period, hinted at an affair. In one message, Thomas wrote, "I can't wait to be free of all this," followed by, "Soon we'll have the life we dreamed of." When confronted, Thomas initially denied the affair, but under pressure, he admitted to the relationship. He claimed the emails were just fantasy and insisted it had no bearing on Barbara's disappearance. But detectives wondered, was Thomas's desire for freedom enough to drive him to murder? Meanwhile, a search of Daniel's online activity revealed equally shocking discoveries. On the night Barbara went missing, Daniel had searched phrases like "how to make someone disappear" and "cleaning up bloodstains." When pressed, Daniel dismissed the searches as morbid curiosity fueled by crime documentaries he liked to watch. However, his explanation did little to calm suspicions. Even more alarming was the discovery of a hidden bank account in Daniel's name, containing over $30,000. Police traced the funds back to a series of withdrawals from Barbara's personal savings. The timing of these transactions, just days before her disappearance, raised the possibility that Daniel had been embezzling money and feared Barbara would expose him. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but they painted two possible narratives. Was Thomas the mastermind, using Daniel as an unwitting accomplice? Or was Daniel the instigator, using his father's distractions to carry out a dark plan of his own? The media caught wind of these developments, and the case exploded into a national sensation. News outlets ran with dramatic headlines like, "Husband or stepson, who knows the truth about Barbara Kendhammer?" Talk show hosts speculated about the family's dynamics, and online forums buzzed with amateur sleuths debating every detail. Within Elmwood, the community was deeply divided. Longtime friends of Thomas stood by him, describing him as a devoted husband who could never hurt Barbara. "I've known Tom for 20 years, one neighbor insisted. "There's no way he'd do this." Others, however, weren't so sure. Barbara's colleagues from the local school where she taught painted a different picture. "She confided in me that things at home weren't as perfect as they seemed," one coworker revealed. "She was scared, but she didn't want to say too much." The scrutiny took a toll on the family. Thomas and Daniel avoided public appearances, retreating into the privacy of their home as reporters camped outside. The case had become a spectacle. But for Barbara's closest friends, the noise drowned out the one truth they cared about. Barbara was still missing, and her story deserved justice. As the media frenzy grew, so did the pressure on law enforcement. They needed a breakthrough, and they needed it fast. But the next revelation would be the most chilling of all, shifting the investigation into uncharted territory and bringing the nation to the edge of its seat. Months had passed since Barbara Kendhammer's disappearance, and the case seemed to have stalled. Public interest waned as the media moved on to other headlines. But for law enforcement, the investigation was far from over. Then a game-changing breakthrough reignited the pursuit of justice. It started with a re-examination of the forensic evidence. In a lab far from the glare of the media, a forensic analyst made a discovery that would crack the case wide open. Tiny fibers found on Barbara's clothing were matched to a specific area in the family's backyard. Investigators returned to the property with ground-penetrating radar. What they found buried beneath layers of soil stunned everyone. Barbara's body wrapped in a tarp, hidden near the base of an old oak tree. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma as the cause of death, alongside signs of a struggle. Investigators now had the physical evidence they needed to prove this was no accident or random act. The focus shifted firmly to the two men who had dominated the investigation from the start, Thomas and Daniel Kendhammer. In the face of mounting pressure, it was Daniel who cracked first. During a grueling 12-hour interrogation, Daniel confessed, but his story took an unexpected turn. He claimed his father had orchestrated the murder, promising him a share of Barbara's life insurance payout if he helped cover up the crime. Daniel insisted he only helped bury the body out of fear and loyalty, but his detailed account of the night's events contradicted Thomas's earlier statements. Thomas, when confronted with Daniel's confession, denied everything. He portrayed his stepson as unstable, desperate for money, and willing to lie to save himself. The fractured alliance between the two men became a spectacle in itself, as each pointed the finger at the other. But the truth, as revealed in court, painted a far more tragic and sinister picture. The trial of Thomas and Daniel Kendhammer captivated the nation. For weeks, spectators packed the courtroom while millions watched televised updates. Prosecutors laid out a compelling case against the father and stepson, weaving together forensic evidence, Daniel's confession, and a damning digital trail. Barbara's voice came through loud and clear, even in her absence. Friends and colleagues testified about her growing fear in the months leading up to her death. Emails and diary entries revealed a woman trapped in an increasingly toxic environment, struggling to maintain her dignity and safety. One chilling email to a close friend read, "I feel like I'm suffocating in my own home. I don't know how much longer I can take it." The prosecution argued that Thomas had masterminded the murder, driven by financial motives and a crumbling marriage. They presented surveillance footage showing Thomas purchasing duct tape and a tarp just days before Barbara's disappearance. His internet search history included phrases like quick ways to silence someone and insurance payout timeline. But the defense countered with an equally striking narrative, shifting the blame squarely onto Daniel. They painted him as a troubled young man with a history of deceit and aggression. Character witnesses testified about his frequent outbursts and erratic behavior. The defense argued that Daniel acted alone, possibly in a fit of rage during a heated argument with Barbara. The turning point came during Daniel's testimony. On the stand, his demeanor oscillated between defiance and despair. He recounted his father's alleged manipulation, claiming Thomas had promised to fix everything if Daniel followed his instructions. But under cross-examination, Daniel admitted to inconsistencies in his story, raising doubts about his credibility. In closing arguments, the prosecution emphasized the overwhelming evidence tying both men to the crime, describing it as a tragic conspiracy born out of greed and dysfunction. The defense urged jurors to separate fact from speculation, arguing there was no concrete proof Thomas had been involved in the physical act of murder. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury returned with its verdict. Thomas Kendhammer was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Daniel Kendhammer was convicted of second-degree murder and tampering with evidence, sentenced to 25 years in prison. The courtroom was silent as the sentences were read, except for the quiet sobs of Barbara's friends and family. Outside, reporters scrambled to capture the reactions of the public, who remained divided even in the face of the verdict. For Barbara's loved ones, the trial brought a bittersweet sense of closure. Justice had been served, but it could never bring back the vibrant, compassionate woman whose life was cut short. In the years since the trial, Barbara's story has become a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the hidden dangers that can lurk within a family. The case of Barbara Kendhammer will be remembered not just for its twists and turns, but for the enduring question it poses. How well do we ever truly know those closest to us? The Kendhammer case is one that left scars not only on a family, but also on an entire community. Shellview, once a quiet suburban neighborhood known for its close-knit ties, became a hub of speculation and unease. For neighbors who had shared backyard barbecues and holiday gatherings with the Kendhammers, the reality of what transpired behind closed doors was chilling. Barbara's death had a ripple effect. Longtime friends spoke of how trust between neighbors became strained. Families questioned how well they truly knew one another, and schools held workshops to address children's fears, as many had been classmates of Daniel or seen the family around town. The local church where Barbara had volunteered every Sunday dedicated a memorial garden in her honor. For those who had known her as a generous, warm-hearted woman, the garden served as both a tribute and a painful reminder of the darkness that had unfolded. Meanwhile, Barbara's surviving relatives struggled to move forward. Her sister, who had been her closest confidant, described the years following the trial as a constant battle to find peace. Even law enforcement officers involved in the case admitted the emotional toll it took on them. The lead detective reflected on how the Kendhammer investigation became a career-defining moment, but also one of the most harrowing experiences of his life. "This case taught us that monsters don't always look like monsters," he said. "Sometimes they're the people you see mowing their lawns or waving at you from across the street." As we close this chapter, we invite you, our viewers, to reflect on the story you've just heard. Do you believe the jury reached the right verdict? Were there aspects of the case that left you questioning the true sequence of events? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perhaps you've encountered a story like this in your own life, one where seemingly ordinary lives concealed unimaginable truths. If so, we encourage you to share your story. Each conversation helps us shine a light on the hidden shadows that can exist in any community. Your voice could be the one that sparks awareness or offers comfort to someone going through a similar situation. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the Kendhammer case. But our exploration of human nature's darker corners doesn't end here. In our next episode, we'll unravel the mystery of a mother who vanished from her morning routine without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic note and a family torn apart by suspicion. What really happened on that ordinary Tuesday morning? And could the answers lie in a seemingly innocent childhood secret? Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the gripping tale that's coming up next on the Crime Clock. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, things are not always as they seem.